Hello, everyone. Chuck Summers here, your host for Amplify, the podcast for Association for Accounting Marketing. Today, we're going to be talking about how to turn marketing activities into leads. Many firms have started exploring new marketing tactics recently, and with COVID-19 in full swing, webinars became the go-to platform for engaging with clients and prospects. But even though firms are churning out more and more virtual content, when it comes to turning attendees into genuine leads, marketers are falling short, or at least they feel so, like they are. On this episode of Amplify, we're privileged to hear from two accomplished sales, marketing, and business development professionals. Edward Warren, Business Development Director at Dinamis PR, and Gary Braun, co-founder of Pivotal Advisors. Today, we will talk about what we can do to turn your firm's marketing activities into qualified leads that will ultimately strengthen your bottom line. So with that, Ed, Gary, welcome to Amplify.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you. Good to be
Gary,
here, Chuck.
Good. Gary, starting with you, would you mind just introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about your career path and what brought you to Pivotal Advisors and your current role?
Sure. I'm a lifelong sales guy. So first job out of school was schlepping copiers door to door. That was really fun.
Good
Tough
memory.
job. Did that, sold desktop publishing equipment, sold high-end servers and storage, sold outsourced e-commerce services. So pretty broad range of selling. And in a few of those spots, I got promoted into sales leadership. Found out that sales leadership is a lot more than just helping people close their deals. You got to set strategy and develop comp plans and coach and mentor and hold people accountable. So did that for a period of time. The last company I was at before we started Pivotal Advisors was a company that went from $1 million when I started in 1997 to $400 million when I left there in 2008. And we went through a lot of changes during that evolution of the company to help us scale. And that's what I do today is we take a lot of the things that we learned about having repeatable processes and systems and knowing how to hire and whatnot. And we help small businesses implement those things so they can scale and grow.
Thank you. And before we move, asking Ed to introduce himself, to what extent or your business do you work with professional service firms versus, other industries?
Yeah, lots of them actually. I've done a lot in the financial area. We worked with a lot of CPAs, some banks. We've worked with people like architects and people along those lines where a lot of them went to school to become a CPA or an architect and whatnot. They didn't go to school to know how to sell. So this is putting some sales process and things in place for them has been helpful to help them figure out how to grow and pass it to that next group of people who are the eventual partners and rainmakers.
Thank you. Ed, share with the firm now. Many people know from your involvement with AIM who you are, but I want you to do a recap of who you are and your current role.
Absolutely. I'm Ed Warren. I am Business Development Director at Dinamis. Dinamis is an offshore bookkeeping service. We provide support to cloud accounting practices, CAS, standalone accounting services firms, and fintech firms. So interestingly, having worked as an accounting marketer, business developer, director of practice growth across two top 200 firms, I'm now selling into CPA firms. So I come to that with a background in IT and telecom sales and advertising sales. So I've spent most of my career in selling, the last 8 of that in the accounting firm space. So pretty good experience with professional services, including CPA firms and IT firms. So a lot of what I learned before I got to accounting firms, I've been able to put to use in the accounting firm setting.
Wonderful. Well, for the listeners, I think the one thing we can be sure of that we're talking to people that, two gentlemen that know what they're talking about and have had the experience and have been there around the block a few times. So thank you for sharing your expertise and time with us today. The AIM membership and those listening to us, it really come from a broad swath of firms and backgrounds, both geographically and in terms of size of firms, service offerings, and their experience from really the more technical or compliance-driven services to the advisory services. But regardless, some have dedicated business development professionals on their teams. Some have large teams, some have small teams. Some, the one marketing, quote unquote, marketing person updates the website, writes all the proposals, and sets the marketing strategy all in the same afternoon. So before we jump in, why don't you both share how you define or distinguish the relationship between marketing and business development before we jump in, really how those relate and together. So Ed, why don't we start with you?
So I'll break that process into three distinct pieces. If you look at a sales funnel, a traditional sales funnel, the top of that funnel is attracting prospects. And I think of that as a purely marketing play. I think of the bottom of the sales funnel as closing sales, and I think of that as a purely sales play or business development play, depending on your terminology. And in the middle is what I call engagement and nurturing. And that's really kind of in the middle. You could call it marketing, you could call it sales development. In the industry, there are tons of terms for that. But that's really the hybrid where the two meet. And those are all things that accounting marketers have to do, whether accounting marketer is their title or director of marketing, or whether they're in a business development role. So that's how I define it.
I appreciate that. Gary, anything to add or to that?
I like how Ed's described that, and I would agree with that. The important part is there's a huge crossover between the two of marketing and BD. We have to be aligned completely on our messaging. What problems are we solving? Who has those problems? How do we communicate with those people? If marketing and sales or BD are in different aspects of that, we have a breakdown. We have to be aligned on who our ideal client is. Who are we going after? Both companies and the stakeholders or decision makers we're targeting with those. So I think they're both important. I do like the nurturing. And then there's one other aspect, which I would probably put in the BD camp, which is networking. Who are the people who can get us to the right decision makers? There are other people who sell to the same types of companies and the same type of decision makers, and aligning ourselves with the right partners and preparing them so they know what to look for, what to listen for, so they know when to bring us in, and vice versa is another super important part of things.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, we've used a term several times here in the podcast already, the term sales. Now, some people, even you can put flowers around it, you can spray it with flower, but some people don't like that term. Some people like business development. Some people like relationship development, whatever it is, to avoid that sales, because they feel that, they went and got a degree, CPA, they're advisors, they're providing a service, they're not selling anything. Or if within the firm, when the marketing comes asking them to, help with an initiative, they feel too sales oriented. And so sometimes we've had to rebrand that within the firms ourselves, but ultimately it's to that same goal. But let me move to really the meat of the content of what we wanted to get to the webinar today. Many professional service marketing professionals have produced more content, more articles, more webinars, more videos, and theoretically generated more leads than they have ever done in previous years due to the COVID pandemic and the need to stay on top of educate. Some of them have just jumped in both feet forward. Others have done it, follow the leader. But regardless, as you speak to industry professionals, and myself included in different industries, there seems to be this disconnect of, hey, we've had tens, a couple hundred, a couple thousand participants involved in these content, whether it's website visits, whether that's webinar attendees, and yet they're struggling to see or to be able to report or connect those webinar attendees or those fresh landing page visitors to actual leads and ultimately revenue. So why don't you talk us through, and Gary, I'll start with you, help them understand, the difference between maybe just, build it and they will come versus, what it takes to see those activities generate revenue.
Yeah, I'm really big on, if you're going to do anything like that, if you're going to do a webinar, if you're going to do an event, you're going to do a town hall or whatnot, have a plan for not only what you're going to do in the event, but how you're going to follow up on it, how you're going to track it. What is the goal? What are you trying to get out of it? I dealing with one client we had, CPA, who said, boy, I've been doing so many, I think I'm up to like 18 town halls I've done. And it was all on PPP and PPP forgiveness and all kinds of stuff. And I said, that's awesome. And I go, how many people total have you had there? And he's like, geez, hundreds. I go, how much of that has turned into business? Dead silence. And he said, well, what's your plan? How are you following up with these people? How are you, what's your messaging? How are you getting them on the horn? He goes, hadn't really thought about that. Okay, that's the problem that we got to solve for, is before we even do anything, we got to have a plan for who's following up. What is the message when we follow up? What's enticing to engage them? How do we be relevant to them? A lot of times when I do, a webinar or something else, there'll be like, a tool, send me a note so you can get the tool, or a copy of the slides at a minimum, or maybe you can have a free 30-minute consult, but there's some hook, if you will, as you're doing them. But it's great that everybody is out there providing a lot of content. There's got to be some type of a hook to get them going, and a plan ahead of time. Who's going to do it? What's your messaging? What's our goal? How are we going to track it? How are we going to report on it? Having that up front is hugely important. And not to go on too much, but if you sat down ahead of time and said, our goal is you, Mr. and Mrs. Partner, are going to follow up on all the leads, and they step back and they go, I don't have time to do all that. Cool, let's have that discussion and decision ahead of time so we can give it to somebody else. But don't just have the event and have all these leads and then go, well, I don't have time for it. Talk about it ahead of time. Have a plan.
Thank you. Ed, I would like your perspective, and to piggyback off what Gary just said, whose responsibility is that?
In my case, it's actually my team or me that are responsible. And what I'll say is, it's great to have these events, but don't expect for the phone to ring afterwards. Don't expect that the prospect or the suspect is going to follow up with you, because guess what? They've got other stuff to do. And in fact, that's probably even more of an acute problem during COVID, because everybody's working from home. Some of these folks have kids that they're trying to educate while mom and dad are working full-time jobs. So ironically, while I think the need for my particular service might be even more valuable during the pandemic, my ability to get people to proactively call me is lower. So what I have to do is I have to make sure that we are touching these folks as often as we can, generally through email, until we get to some sort of tipping point where it makes sense to pick up the phone. And this is where I think people who are traditional marketers or who own that marketing hat may be missing the boat, where a traditional business developer or salesperson wouldn't. We have to at some point pick up the phone and talk with these folks, even if the result of that is a no, or a I'm not interested in having a conversation. If we've invested a partner's time, whether it's PPP, whether it's talking about outsourced accounting, or picking up in a nonprofit niche audit, we cannot leave it to chance and expect that person to call us, because now more than ever, there's so many demands on that prospect's time. So if it's nothing other than scheduling a sequence of emails that go to that person over the next 10 or 12 weeks, and at some point, someone has ownership of making a follow-up call. And if it's an affirmative answer, or even if it's a no, I'm not interested, or no, not now, know what happened with that particular lead, and more importantly, be able to provide some sort of feedback that talks about the ROI of the event. And I think I may be jumping ahead. I'm sorry about that if I am.
No. Yeah, Gary.
Could I just tag on to Ed's comments there? Because I agree with everything he just said, but I also like to make sure that when the email goes out or the phone call goes out or something else, we got to be super relevant. And it's not about us. We can't talk about, here's what we do, here's why you need this or that or the other. It's about them and the problems they might be facing. So if I followed up with you, Chuck, and I said, here's all the things that Pivotal does, we'd love to talk to you. Snooze fest on your side. You hit delete faster than I could complete that sentence. If I followed up with you and said, thanks for attending the webinar, here's 3 or 4 common problems that firms like you have, yada 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 yada, and you look at any of those and go, I do have those problems. I'd love to talk to you if you have any of these, and we do a quick 30-minute phone call. Now you're engaging them, and it's about them, not about you. So the relevancy in those follow-up messages, be it email or social media or phone call or whatever, is hugely important.
So that's great. Now, some people who are listening to this may say, like, pick up a phone and call the 250 people that attended my webinar. That just, I don't have time for that. If the partners don't have time for that. And regardless, I think that maybe that's the good, better, best, and the best, is the personal touch. But as you talked about, many firms, they're utilize what I'm hearing you say, utilize the systems, the platforms, technologies that are there, create templates that just simplify that process after, so that, you don't have to send individual emails to every single attendee, but try to build that in. And what I found, and I don't know if you have any best practices or thoughts, especially for these small firms that may only have a couple of people, what are some best practices, or what are some resources, tools you found to really make it seem like you can touch a lot more people or potential prospects with less effort and without breaking the bank?
Ed, why don't you go first?
Okay, thank you. I would say, invest in a CRM. I mean, you've got to have the tools to do the job. I think, as a rule, and I've worked in 2 top 200 CPA firms, I think CPA firms have been slow to the game on getting CRMs, and maybe even slower on actually really using and leveraging the functionality of them. It's critical to have the tools and to use them, because a lot of what that follow-up process looks like can be automated and can be made easier, as Gary was saying. In my mind, and in fact, I've got my team working on this now. We're going to have at some point a series of between 3 and 7 emails that we're going to send to people after each one of the webinars we present. And to Gary's point, one of the things that we will be talking about in that series of emails is, are you using the right resource for the right job? If you're paying $60 an hour to do work that can be done by a $9 an hour person, you've got a problem, because you're leaving margin on the table. And so that, I can't throw that in every email that I send to somebody, but if that's somewhere in the sequence and they go, wow, I've got an $84,000 a year person plus benefits doing bank reconciliations. That's crazy, right? So if that light bulb goes off, in virtually every email I send, I have in my signature line, schedule an appointment. It's a Calendly link. And in my case, it happens to be in my HubSpot CRM. And I put the onus on the prospect as often as I can to say, hey, if this feels like something you want to spend 15 minutes talking about, use this link, find a time that works with your schedule, and let's talk about it. And then the monkeys, that's really a bad expression. It's on them to say, hey, this guy can help me bring more margin into my practice. I'm going to reach out to him.
Oh, I appreciate that.
That's a great example of you addressing their problem. That wasn't about your services. That was about the problem that they might have. That was perfect. I love that. I agree with you too. There's a lot of good technology out there. Some CRMs do it, some don't, but the ability to email out and see if people are opening them. See how many times they're opening them. If you don't have that, you could use a MailChimp or a Constant Contact or something like that, or HubSpot's another good one. You could send them out, and then the next morning look and say, Ed didn't open it at all. Chuck opened my email 3 times. I think I'm going to follow up with Chuck.
Mhm.
That would be, a good use of that type of a tool. And depending on how big the firm is, you might just have the mail follow up, again, relevant messaging, and I can use technology to see if they're doing it. For all of them, I kind of like to triage them. So let's look at all the people who are attendees. Which ones are in my sweet spot? I definitely want to follow up with them and see how it's going. And is there an interest or not? Who's outside of the sweet spot? I'm going to deprioritize those a little bit, but then I'm going to create a plan for how I'm going to follow up with all the ones that are in my sweet spot who showed interest. Those are at the top of my list. There's a lot of technology to help you do that.
If I could just piggyback one more thought here, while using technology, because many of my prospects, certainly in the outsourcing lane, are CPAs. One of my tools is CPE eligible webinars. And the great thing about those is they have polling questions. So I have 4 qualifying questions built into my webinars. So at the end of each event, I have people who are self-qualifying. One of my questions is, would you be interested in having a conversation about outsourcing? And there are 4 answers. One is, I'd like to do it in 30 days. I'd like to do it in 90 days. I'd like to do it in 6 months, or I'm really not interested. And what typically happens is the people who are decision makers, the partners, the managing partners, the practice leaders, they're at least interested in having a conversation. If I'm talking to a bookkeeper, if the attendee is a bookkeeper or a staff senior, and they're not a decision maker, they're probably going to say no, but I know if they're working for a firm that they still may be able to refer me into or give me an introduction to the decision maker.
I love both of you have really hit on a point that a little preparation seems to go a long way, in that so much, there's a lot of data out there, probably sitting in the platforms that we're already using, that can really help us refine and filter that down to a more manageable list, something that we feel that are, using our time more wisely. Now, as we wrap up here, I'd like to ask your opinions. What are some best practices for listeners to, maybe we can't ensure, but we can increase the likelihood that the ROI on all these marketing initiatives they're doing, COVID, post-COVID, a lot of times we're not post-COVID, but something as we evolve into the next stage, we're continuing, and sometimes a new wave seems to be, coming up here shortly, or regardless, let's say it's 6 months, a year from now, or sometime in the future. What are some best practices that firms or individual practitioners can use to increase the likelihood that their ROI is higher, and increases the potential of generating leads and eventually revenue?
I'll start. I'm going to go back to something I said at the start of this. Have a plan. Have it all set up ahead of time so we know what is the message going to be, who's following up, what are their goals, when are they going to follow up by, what messaging are they going to use. But you discuss this before the event even happens. During the event, I love what Ed said, have a hook in there. It's a tool, it's a copy of the slides, it's a free consult, it's something, but there's a hook in there which makes them want to reach back to you for something. My whole triage concept, and the last one we really didn't talk about to make sure people are doing it, I love public results. So we had 100 people attend. Chuck, you were responsible to follow up with 25 of those. Here's how many you've touched. That's public. We review that every week. And you don't want to come back and go, there's 25 assigned to me. I contacted one. You want to be able to show I've contacted all. And guess what? I got 3 meetings off of that. And if we review that every week, people tend, even the partners, tend to respond to it. Maybe you only assign the partners 5, or you only assign them something else. But if we say we're going, part of the plan is every week we're going to say, how did we do on our assignments? It makes a world of difference. Everybody likes to see that they've accomplished their thing, and it just becomes, an accountability measure. But public numbers are awesome.
Great suggestions and ideas. Ed?
So from my perspective, I would say the measurement, and I mean, we've talked about this several times. Gary talked about this a couple of different times just recently. Measure. When I was running a team of business developers and marketers, I started just throwing stuff against the wall. And eventually, by the time we refined it, I had 8 different KPIs that our team was measuring and providing to our COO for monthly board meetings. So we got to the point where we knew what the COO and the managing partner were looking to see from a marketing ROI perspective. I now work for a serial entrepreneur, and I just got a conference attendance funded for potentially a new channel, and I asked for $2,500. I explained to him that the median spend for the targets in this group that this conference was catered to was 5 times the revenue of our average tier 1 client. So in this case, the median customer in this set of customers that come to this conference spends 60 grand a year on IT, and our tier 1 customers come in at an average of $1,500 a month. So if we land one of these guys, it's going to be worth 3 times our tier 1 customer. So he's like, that sounds pretty good. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to turn this around in 90 days. This could be a 12 to 18 month process. But if I land one of these at 3 to 5 times what our average customer is, this is way more valuable than just saying, hey, I'd like, $5,000 for a pay-per-click campaign. Because we don't know what's coming at the end of that road. It might be nothing. So it's in my mind, it's all about the ROI and measuring what your managing partner, the person who funds your budget, you got to be providing the metrics that they want to see. They might not know what that is, frankly, but help them get there.
And speaking for myself, I know that if we can report and justify and to show the good work that we as business development professionals and marketing professionals within the accounting industry, it just ultimately increases our value across the board. Well, Gary, Ed, it has been great. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for sharing your insights. I know those who have listened in will greatly benefit from listening to this. For those of you who are listening to Amplify today, please reach out to Ed Warren and Gary Braun on LinkedIn. Reach out. They'll definitely, they love to connect with you one-on-one and help you through any of the business development, issues or questions that you may have. Thanks for tuning in to Amplify, and we'll tune off for today. Thank you both.
Thanks, Chuck.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chuck. Thanks, Gary.
Power up, listening. We're always